So in this week's Parshas Vo'ero, we start learning about the Aseres HaMakos, the 10 plagues which HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought on Eretz Mitzrayim. And in Parshas Vo'ero, we don't have any mitzvahs, but there's an interesting Gemara in Masechet Pesachim Daf Nun Gimel. So the second Makkah, the second plague was Sfardeim. ושורץ היה אור צפרדעים, ואולו ובו בביסךו, חדר משקפכו ועל מטוסךו בביס עבדךו, ובתנורכו ובמשערויסךו. In your ovens and in your bread. Oid zu dorosh toidos ish Romi. He was a Roman. Was he a Jew or not? He was a Jew, כך משמע מדברי גמרא. Maru Hanani Mishol Vazaria Shemasu Atzmum Al Kiddush Hashem. So does anybody know where we find the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Where is the source of this story? Who would know? If you know, I would be pleasantly surprised. So where is it written, the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Anybody know? In which Sefer of the Tanakh? In Sefer Daniel. So you know the story? Yeah, they were thrown into the Kivshanu Eish because the crazy king, Nebuchadnezzar, decreed that no one could pray or bow down to any god besides himself. So Nebuchadnezzar decided he's God. Interesting decision. And everybody needs to pray to him. And Daniel davened 3 times a day, and that is the source, that we need to daven 3 times a day. And he was looked after. So he was thrown into the Kivshanesh, first of all, Gov Ha'aroyas. But then Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into a Kivshanoesh, and the story is told in Sefer Daniel. Dorash toides ish Romi, Maru Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah shemasu as Kiddush Hashem. Nasu kal v'choyim mitzvardeim, u'matzvardeim she'em mitzuven al Kiddush Hashem. Ksiv behu, v'olu v'bo v'veisecho v'talnecha misharesecho, emosai meishores mitzuyen etzel tana, b'shosha tanacham. Onesh mitzuven al Kiddush Hashem, alachas kamo v'kamo. So the Tzvardeim were everywhere. In the bread and in the ovens. Were the ovens cold or hot? When is the bread next to the oven? When it is baked. So they went into a flaming oven. V'masu nafsham al kedushas Hashem. So in source number 3 we have the Rambam. And the Rambam says, so why does Toidish need to learn from Tzvardeim, and why doesn't he simply quote the Rambam? Obviously, maybe Toidish wasn't such a big lamdan, he didn't get to the Rambam, but he learned Chumash. You know, he went to Cheder, but didn't go far beyond that. So all he knew was, but Chazal quoted the story, so obviously there is something to learn. If it's just the ignorance of Toides Ishleimi, why would Chazal tell the story? So many asked the question, including Toises, why do we need to learn from the Tzvardeim? So Toises answers in Pesachim Nun Gimel, when the Goyim will tell you, either bow down to Avodah Zorah or you would be killed. And you could run away. You could escape in the middle of the night. Should you run away? Or are you entitled to say, I don't want to run away. I want to be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim. I want the people to see that I am willing to give my life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is Yehereg Val Yaver only when there is no third option? It is either Yareg or either Yehereg or Yavar, or if there's maybe option number 3, I could escape, I could run away, I could bribe them to let me out, is it still Yehereg v'al Yavor. This is what we learned from the Tzvardeim. So the Tzvardeim were everywhere. Only a few of them went into the ovens. The other went into the bedroom. The other took a jacuzzi. And the others, had a good time wherever they went. So who are the ones that jumped into the ovens and were burnt and reduced the ashes? They volunteered to do so. They could have gone with their friends, into the bedroom or into the dining room or who knows where, into the pool in the backyard. It is where they would feel most comfortable. So obviously many of them volunteered and they went into the oven. So from here we learn that you are entitled to be Mekadosh Shem Shemaim, even though you could get away neither Yavar or Yehereg. And that's a gewaltige Kiddush that they learned from Tzvardeim. So every sensible person says, the Tzvardeim make decisions. Do they have Bechira? And my answer is, well, these super Tzvardeim that come from nowhere, b'derech neis, we don't know, maybe they do. Maybe they have brains, maybe they do. Because the scientists don't know this species of Tzvardeim, who was one huge Tzvardeya, and you bang it over the head and 1,000,000 Tzvardeim come out. So those, extinct species of Tzvardeim maybe were very smart. Or maybe it is just b'derech remez. B'derech remez. This is a nace, this is what happened, and if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us this nace, we need to learn from the nace. So, but this is the Gemara, Toides Ishroimi, and Toises explains, it's a gewaltige Chiddush that we learn from the Tzvardeim, that even though a person has a third option, it is not necessarily or Yehereg or Yavor. He could just escape and run away and get out of his dilemma. He has the right to say, I don't want to run away. And if I am confronted with this fateful decision, am I going to die for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or will I bow down to Avodah Zorah? He has the right to say, I want to be Mekadosh Shem Shemaim, and that is a gewaltige Chiddush. So the Rambam writes these halachas in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, and let's briefly go through these two halachas in Rambam. כל בית ישראל מצוון על קידוש השם הגודל הזה, שנאמר ונקדשתי בתוך בני ישראל, מזורן שלא לחללוי, שנאמר לא תחללו השם קודשי, כיצד? כשיעמד דוד כחום וינס ישראל לעבר הלחץ מכל מצווה שאמור לו בתורה, או יהרגנו, the din is, יעבור ואל יהרג. שנאמר, אלה דברים מה שיעשו עושים אותם, וחי בהם ולא ישיומס בהם, ומייס, ולא יובר, הרי זה מסחיה בנפשי. באמת, בו מאמורים בשער מצווה, חוץ מהבוי זכום גיל הרז, שפיחס דומם. אבל שלוש עבד עשילו, אם יוים אלוהי עבור על אחס ממוי תהורג, יהרג ואל יעבור. באמת, בו מאמורים, בזמן שאוהב תיכון מסחיה ולנו עושה עצמוי, כגון שאונסו ליבנס לבייסה בשבס, ולבשל תבשילוי, או יונסה של הבויה לו, אבל מסחיה ונבירו על מצווה בלבד. אם הויו בין אלמין עצמוי, Yava but Yehereg. But if it's before Asur Misal, Yehereg va'al Yavo. So the Rambam writes the fundamental halachas. Gimel Averes Chamuris Shebetoire is always Yehereg va'al Yavo. Whether it's B'tzina or B'farhesya. Doesn't matter what their motives are. Other mitzvahs, if it's B'tzina, Yavo va'al Yehereg. If it's befaresya, v'nekdashti b'terech b'nei Yisrael. The first three words in this Rambam, Kol Beis Yisrael. Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky Zecher Tzaddik Lebrucha is medayik from this Rambam. Even Ktanim are mechuyev in Kiddush Hashem. Kol Beis Yisrael. And I think it is very unlikely. The reason a kotnas potam and a mitzvah is because it's not a bardas. Interesting, it's nowhere in Shas. Nowhere in Shas do we find the Gemara why Ktanim are potam and mitzvahs. It is a Rashi in the beginning of Masechet Chagiga. But it is a milza de pshita. Ktanim are potam and mitzvahs because they don't bear responsibility. They are not defined halachically as bardas. So how could Kiddush Hashem be different than all the other mitzvahs? If the reason is because they bear no liability, it doesn't depend how important the mitzvah is. How could a kohen be chayiv in any mitzvah? So the story of a Jewish mother with her 7 children, they were meisa nefesh, they weren't mechuyev, einoi mitzvah v'oisa. I mean, obviously they had a great chinuch, but one cannot say they're mechuyev. According to Rav Yankov Kamenetsky, if they're mechuyev, would they be liable and based in? Question isn't that relevant because the Rambam writes, and that is the next halacha, even given averas chamur shebetoirem, if a person was over aveira, he's not liable and based in, because oinus tachmona patrei. His aveira is not the aveira of arayis. It is not the aveira of avodah zorah. It is the aveira of chilul Hashem. And chilul Hashem doesn't bear liability and based in. Chilul Hashem is between a person and a Kodesh Baruch Hu. I think it is very unreasonable that a kohen is chayiv in Kiddush Hashem, even though he's porter of all the other mitzvah b'Torah. But the Rambam writes, Kol Beis Yisrael, Perek Gimel of Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam writes, Kol Beis Yisrael noyagim and aseres yemei tshuva to give tzedakah, more tzedakah than all year. Does that include little children? Probably not. Kids don't have money. So the lashon Kol Beis Yisrael doesn't necessarily mean Gedolim Viktanim. Just means Kol Beis Yisrael, everyone. Kohenim, Levinim, Yisraelim, Anoshim, Benoshim, Geirim, everyone. So there's a machlokes between Rambam and Ramban. It is clear in the halachas we just learned, according to the Rambam, Gemel Averes Chamurois, Yeherek Val Yaver, that is the mitzvah v'negdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. Let's have a look at the Ramban source number 4, Teda. Gimel Averes Elu HaChamurois lo mepnei Kiddush Hashem ne'esru, lefichach af al pi she'eino mischaven lahaviroi osu. אבל שאר averes שנעשו ונקדשתי בתוך נאסור, הותרו לנו את עצמם דולקה משום קידוש השם. The Ramban writes, Gimel averes chamuras shebetoira, or yeherek val yaver, that is not mishum kiddush Hashem. That is because these averes are so harsh or so chomer that their din is yeherek val yaver. Has nothing to do with kiddush Hashem. Chidush Aran, source number 6, writes the same. In Rambam, it is clear it is about v'negdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. Because according to the Rambam, if you were over in avodah zorah or gilei arayis, you're not liable. So this proves it is not gilei arayis that is yeherek val yaver, it is v'negdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. So the argument of the Ramban is, Hanoas atzmon, there is no v'negdashti. The Rambam would say, not always. It depends which Aveda. These 3 Avedas, even Hanoas atzmon, is v'negdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. And that is the machlokes between Rambam and Ramban. So on the second side of our page, we deal with a question which, only Jews ever had to deal with these outrageous shilas. And throughout our history, again and again and again and again, they all envied us and they all tried to bring us to turn away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to accept different faiths. It was the Christians, it was the Muslims, and every generation. So the Shloah Kodesh is the very first that deals, does one say a brocha on Kiddush Hashem? The Gemara at the end of Masechet Brochas, both Bavli and Yerushalmi, describes the Mesiras Nefesh of Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. Sorku besorei b'masreike shel Basel, boi mekabel al atzmai ol malchus shamayim. The Gemara we just mentioned before in Masechet Gittin is about a Jewish mother. The Gemara doesn't say what her name was. In Medish, she is Chana. In other Midrashim, she is Miriam. And her 7 children were Moise Nefesh. The Gemara doesn't deal with the question, did they say a bracha? Is there a bracha on the mitzvah of V'nigdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael? Nere b'yenai, writes the Shlo, Mi shebole yodei Kiddush Hashem ha'makai, mitzvah sasei de V'nigdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael, שמפורסם לעשרה בני ישראל, אז קודם שיהרגו יבורך בשמחה. בורך אתו השם אלוקינו מלך העולם, אשר קדשנו במצוות וציוונו לקדש שמוי ברבים. כדנהר במצוות עשה שמבורכן על קיומון, כדגרסינם את הספתא דברוכוס. ווייס המצוות צורך לבורך לפניהם. ואף שיש הרבה מצוות עשה שמבורכן עליהם, כבר נאמרו בהם טעמים, ואין טעמים אלה שייכים, למצווה עשה של ונקדשתי. Is that so? I'm not so sure. We'll deal with that in a few minutes. אמנם, בעניין נוסח הברוכה. נראה בענייני כמו שכספתי ליעל. לקדש שמוי ברבים. כי כהנך לקוחך מישראל בנוסח הברוכה. Sometimes we say al, sometimes we say le. The Ran explains, a mitzvah that only you could perform, you cannot send a shaliach, you say le. If it's a mitzvah you could perform al yidei shaliach, you say al. So, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, could you send someone else? Oh, a lot of people would be happy to send someone else. But if it is you that is forced to bow down to Avodah Zorah or get killed, the easiest thing would say, I'm going to send someone else, okay? Just wait a few minutes. So the Shlo says, it is about you and only you. And therefore, you don't say, Al Kiddush Hashem at Lekadesh Shemoi Berabim. The mitzvah v'nigdashti is even beinu lebein atzmo if it's b'shas hagzera. And usually these things only happen b'shas hagzera. And b'shas hagzera even beinu lebein atzmo. Asura miyasor is shelo b'shas hagzera. So what would you say b'shas hagzera? Lekadesh shemoi berabim? It is not berabim. So probably then we say simply lekadesh shemoi. Minchas chinuch. I think that Ramban agrees that if it's not lanu asatzman, but la'aviro yaladas, everybody would agree it's also v'nigdashti. Lo yigora mesharim. It says the machloikes Rambam and Ramban would be gimel averis chamuras lo lanu asatzman. The Rambam says, but these gimel averis, it doesn't matter what their intention is. We have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. Minchas chinuch ani mesupak k'manenas atzmoi mitztaref la'asora. Sora miyasor. Is that besides the one that's going to get killed? Or is he part of it? So that's interesting. Suffolk of the Mishnah Berurah. Shalosh Teshuvos Mimamakim. Does anybody know what this sefer is about? Who wrote this sefer? Rabbi Ephraim Moshe. He was a big tzaddik and a gavaldige Talmid Chochem. And this sefer reflects the nature of the sefer. He was in the Kovno ghetto. So in the ghettos, there were no official Rabbonim. The Germans didn't care about Rabbonim. They only killed them. But he was a major Talmid Chochem, and many shaylos that came up in the ghetto, he was asked. And he used to scribble his tshuvos on scrap paper and bury those little notes next to the posts of the barbed wire fence surrounding the ghetto, hoping that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help him and he will survive the tragedy, he will dig up those little notes and expand them and write a sefer. And B'siyata D'Shmaya did survive, and that is the sefer Mimamakim, 5 volumes. And he went over many questions that he was asked and he dealt with. So In this short excerpt, he deals with a shlo about the brocha. אחרי איזה זמן בוא אל היישוב הקודש, וסיפר לי שגם הגאון רב אלחנן וסרמן, גם הוא לימד את בנוי רב נפתולי, שגם הוא היה שם, את נוסח הברוכה בשלו, ואומר לו יזה בשם מורן רבנו חפץ חיים. As you know, Reb Elchanan Wasserman was Makadosh Shemayim Barabim. The entire Kehillah in Branovich was murdered in Kovno. Reb Elchanan, his son, and many others. And Reb Elchanan taught his people that when time comes, we will say this brocha. And he said that he heard that from the Chofetz Chaim. ואני גם כן שמעתי מנכדו של החפץ חיים, רבי שוע לוינסון, שהוא גם כן בגטו, שכך שמע מהחפץ חיים ביוסי ברוסיה בזמן המלחמה העולמית הראשונה. Chofetz Chaim didn't live by the Second World War, by the Holocaust, but in the First World War, they were also very tragic, and thousands of Jews were killed. And Chofetz Chaim said then, בעת שהשתוללו ברוסיה מחנות מרצחים שהרגו ביהודים שיש לבורך את הברוכה כפי הנוסח של השלו לקדש שמוי ברבים. We do not find this in earlier sources. ולדידי צורך עיון. Yeah, so the Shlo says all the reasons not to say a brocha don't apply to Kiddush Hashem, and I think they do. Because one of the most fundamental explanations, when do we say a brocha and when we don't, any brocha which is not in my power, it's totally biyad acherim, you don't say a brocha. And that's why you don't even say a brocha by tzedakah, because maybe the other party wouldn't be willing to take. So this mitzvah is up to others, it's not up to us. I think the Shlo says, your mitzvah is not to die. Your mitzvah is to be willing to die. Your mitzvah is not to bow down. So even if they threaten you and you say, I will not bow down to Avodah Zorah, you were already Makayim, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, and it doesn't depend whether they kill you or not. That is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to be willing to die. And that is totally up to you. However, and I ain't because the bracha needs to be oivel asiyoson. And how do you know that after you say the bracha, he will still demand bow down? He said it before. But if the mitzvah is to say no, it's still tol b'das achedim, because the bracha needs to be oivel asiyoson. So maybe you will say that bracha with such fervor, and they'll all run away. They're going to be terrified. So how do you know? So it's not oivel asiyosa. It's tzorech iyun.
You say the bracha and then you say no. You just put the choice in front of you. You made the bracha and you said no.
Maybe. But it is only if he will still insist. It's still Torah b'das achedim. Maybe after the bracha he'll say, okay, go home. It's still Torah b'das achedim. So maybe if he says no toch kedei dibur. Yes, that is question number 2. But before question number 2, I want to put that number 3. One of the klolim and berachas mitzvahs, which I wrote about extensively, is there is no bracha only in a mitzvah that you're makayim b'maisa. Only if you do something in an active way, not in a passive way. And in Kiddush Hashem, it is the others that will do something. Your mitzvah is to abstain from doing something, and that is b'sheval taisa, and it's not b'kum v'asei. And there is no brocha only on ma'isa mitzvahs, like lulav, like matzah, like sukkah, like any other mitzvah upon which we say berachas mitzvah. There is no brocha on sheval taisa. There is only a brocha on akum v'asei. That would be question number 2. Question number 3 is, Kiddush Hashem is when you die for a Kadosh Baruch Hu by refusing to violate his mitzvahs. The Nazis didn't care about your mitzvahs. They killed converts to Christianity. They killed anybody that has Jewish blood. So it's not clear what was the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. I think we spoke about this in the past. Every Jew that is murdered because he's a Jew is a Kiddush. And he goes straight up to Gan Eden. And I spoke about this at the beginning of this war, about all the people that were killed on Simchas Torah and murdered because they're Jewish, because they're Israelis. And I brought the source of the Maharil. The Maharil writes that Kedoshei Prague are Kedoshim ve'en kol beryeh yochel lamed b'mchitzoson. And the Maharil doesn't tell us what's the story of Kedoshei Prague. What we do find is the Seder Adoros. In Prague there was a pogrom. Hundreds of Jews were murdered. Had nothing to do with Avodah Zorah or Gimel Avedas Chamuras. They were just murdered and butchered. And the Maharil, one of the Rishonim, writes or Kedoshim, and it's Kaporas Avonos, but it is not the mitzvah of V'nigdashti. The mitzvah of V'nigdashti is when they give you an option. So, and therefore it's a Tema B'yeinai, the Rebbe Chona Wasserman and the Chofetz Chaim. This is not the mitzvah of V'nigdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. I wrote a tshuva years ago, and sometimes tshuvas are not only an intellectual challenge and endeavor, but sometimes an emotional one as well. So there was a wonderful person that wrote the story of his father. And his father was a chashav yid, a erlech yid, a survivor, a Holocaust survivor. And he survived the war by disguising as a Christian. And he asked me, is that something not to be proud of? Maybe he shouldn't write that. Because the Shulchan Aruch says that a Jew is not allowed to say, I'm a Christian, to save his life. So maybe writing his father's story, he shouldn't write that detail. But it is, it's a fundamental part of his experience, how he survived the war, where he was, and what he did. And I explained that it is no blemish at all, and he definitely should write that story. The halacha that you cannot pretend to be a Christian is when it's about religion. They want to kill you because you're an observant Jew. So you can't say, no, I don't believe in Elokei Yisrael. I believe in another God. That is Avodah Zorah, and that is an Isser. But when they want to murder you just because of your race, and it has nothing to do with religion, any way you can get off the hook is a mitzvah gedolah. So this halacha that you cannot fake and pretend to be a Christian is when it's about, is it HaKadosh Baruch Hu you believe in, or Elohim-hashchor? That is when you cannot say, I believe in Elohim-hashchor, only in Kiddush B'richo. But if it has nothing to do with religion, they don't want to kill you, they don't care who you believe in, they just want to kill you because you're Jewish, then there's no issa at all to say, I am not Jewish. And thousands of kids, I don't know, have the numbers survived because they were given over to non-Jewish families and tried to pretend. So my tshuva was no chesaron at all, and you definitely should share that story. So today we spoke about the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And let me just make one comment. Many generations were mekayim the mitzvah v'nikdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael by dying. But you could be mekayim this same mitzvah by living, and not only by dying. And the Rambam Perek Yesod HaTorah, when the Rambam gives all the halachas of v'nikdashti b'toich Yisrael, and the end of the Perek, the Rambam writes that whenever a Jew is mekadesh Shem Shemayim, living and not dying, he is also mekayim the mitzvah v'nikdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. And the Gemara says at the end of Yuma, when a person acts, reacts, interacts in a way that everybody would say, Ra'u ze shalom ha'Torah, kama noim ma'asav, kama mitukonim drachav, ashrei mi shalim doi Torah. Ashrei ovev shelim dei Torah, Ashrei rabem shelim Torah, harei zeh mekadesh Shem Shemayim. And if a person acts in a way that people will point to him and say, Re'u zeh shalom HaTorah, kama gruim ma'asav, וכמה מקולקלים דרכיו, oy lo shalom HaTorah, oy lo ovev, oy lo rabbi shelim dei Torah, that is a chilul Shem Shemayim. And this is something important to bear in mind. And sometimes when from people are attacked, we say, they are a shoim. We don't care about what they say. But those people that Chazal talk about, when they see a person who's Jewish, who's from, and he doesn't act nicely, and they say, Oy lo shalom HaTorah, they are bad people. They should have said, what a mazel, how great it is that he learned Torah, because if he wouldn't learn Torah, he would be a serial killer. He would be a rapist, he would be a Russia, he would be a bank robber. So Baruch Hashem, he's not nice. And the reason he isn't a serial killer is because he went to yeshiva. Obviously. Just think about it, he's such a nasty person, and he's not polite, and he's not courteous, and he's not so honest. What a mazil he learned in yeshiva, because otherwise he would be malastem esabrias, he would be a serial killer. So they're bad guys. But we bear responsibility even what bad people say about us. You should act in a way that no one should have any negative word to say about you. Not only the good guys, but the bad guys as well. And that is something we all need to bear in mind. So I'm just sharing a story with you, not that it has that much importance. I was once in Europe, summertime, and I was waiting in line to take a cable car up a mountain. And there was an Israeli there, and he tried to organize a group, because a group ticket is cheaper. So he turned to Swiss Goyim, asking them, do you want to be part of my group? And they didn't know, what are you talking about? He said, we have a group, we're going to buy a group ticket and get a discount. And this Goyim asked him with such tmimis, do we know each other? I mean, who are you? I mean, do we know each other? They just didn't get it. Well, what is this guy talking about? And he tried to explain to them, if we're going to be a group, we're going to get a discount. And I knew that person. He was a wealthy guy. And I told him, are you out of your mind? Are you mishuga, entirely mishuga? So you want to get a discount, you're going to pay €1 less? And you're machal Shem Shemayim. What are you doing? Are you just out of your mind? And so not always are we sensitive to be mekadesh Shem Shemayim. So many generations needed to be mekadesh Shem Shemayim by dying. Baruch Hashem, it's not what we are challenged with. We need to be mekadesh Shem Shemayim by living. And the Rambam is mekadesh Kiddush that is found nowhere else. There's Kiddush Shem Shemayim number 3. Whenever a person is Mekayim a mitzvah, bilti la'Hashem levadoi, with pure kavona l'shem shemayim, with no other interest and motive, that is v'nekdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. And that's a gewaldige chiddush of the Rambam. So Baruch Hashem, nobody challenges us to bow down to avodah zorah, but we still have the mitzvah every day, v'nekdashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. Ra'u ze shalomad Torah. Kama noim masav. Kama mitukonim drochov. Harei ze Shem Shemayim es ayev al yadcho. And that is a Kiddush Hashem. And whenever you do any mitzvah, and you have no personal interest, you don't want people to praise you and talk about you, and your only kavanah is l'shem Shemayim, that once again is the mitzvah v'niktashti b'toich b'nei Yisrael. Yerotzen she'ech elkeinu v'moim. We should be zoicha l'kadosh Shem Shemayim each and every moment of our lives, and we should be zoicha to b'soides toivos. And as we read in this week's parsha about the Seres HaMakos and Guras Mitzrayim, we should be zoicha ki yameitzeschem me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois bebias goel tzedek b'mheiro v'yomeinu amen.